Welcome to Stories Junction. Let's begin today's story. I used to believe that marriage was about love, trust, and commitment. That's what I thought when I married Emily 7 years ago. I wasn't perfect, but I was devoted. I worked hard, ensured our bills were paid, and always put her needs before mine. For a while, it felt like we were building something strong, something unbreakable. But then something changed. At first, it was subtle, so small I almost missed it. Emily stopped greeting me at the door when I came home. The texts she used to send throughout the day became infrequent, then non-existent. I chalked it up to stress, to exhaustion, to life simply getting in the way. But deep down I knew, even at home, it felt like I was just there. She barely looked at me. Conversations became mechanical, just the necessities. Did you pay the bill? What time is the appointment? Good night. The warmth, the laughter, the easy companionship we once had. It had faded, replaced by a silence that felt heavier with each passing day. Nights that used to be spent curled up on the couch together turned into her sitting alone, scrolling through her phone, disappearing into the bedroom early. The intimacy that once connected us was gone, like a candle snuffed out in an empty room. I tried to be patient. I asked her, over and over again, "Is everything okay?" And every time, she gave the same answer. "I'm fine," always without looking up, always without emotion. But she wasn't fine, and neither was our marriage. I started seeing the pattern, and once I did, I couldn't ignore it. If I didn't reach out first, there was no conversation. If I didn't initiate a hug, a kiss, any kind of affection, it didn't happen. If I didn't plan a date night, we didn't have one. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that she was overwhelmed, that maybe she'd snap out of it. But the truth clawed at me every single day. People make time for what matters to them, and I wasn't on that list anymore. Every attempt I made to bridge the growing distance between us was met with excuses. "I'm too tired. I have a headache. Maybe another time." But another time never came. One Friday night, I decided to do something special. I left work early, stopped by the market, and picked up everything I needed to make her favorite meal: handmade ravioli with a creamy Parmesan sauce, garlic bread on the side, a bottle of the wine she always used to love. I set the table, dimmed the lights, even lit a few candles, just like I used to when we were newlyweds. I waited, hopeful. Tonight would be different. At 7 p.m., she walked in, tossing her bag onto the chair. "Hey," I greeted, smiling. She barely glanced at me. "Hey." Her eyes flickered to the table, to the meal I had spent hours preparing. She didn't smile. She didn't look touched or happy. Instead, she muttered, "I already ate." I stared at her, feeling something tighten in my chest. "You already ate?" My voice was quieter than I intended. "Yeah, I grabbed something with the girls after work." She slipped off her shoes and, without another word, walked over to the couch, sat down, and pulled out her phone, like I wasn't even there. I sat across from her, waiting, hoping she'd notice my disappointment, that she'd at least acknowledge what I had done. But she just kept scrolling, her face lit by the screen, completely detached from me, from us. After a few minutes, I finally spoke. "Emily." She didn't look up. "What? Are we okay?" She let out a sigh, the kind you give when someone is wasting your time. "Liam, why do you keep asking me that?" "Because we don't talk anymore," I said, my voice steady but strained. "Because you don't even look at me the way you used to." She rolled her eyes. "I'm just tired. Not everything has to be some big problem." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to tell myself that maybe she really was just exhausted. But deep down I knew she wasn't tired. She just wasn't interested anymore. I let it go for a while. I kept convincing myself that I was overreacting, that every couple goes through rough patches, that she would come back to me if I just stayed patient. But as the weeks stretched on, that patience started to feel less like love and more like denial. Emily and I had become strangers under the same roof. Mornings were quiet, except for the occasional sound of coffee being poured or a brief exchange about schedules. Evenings were worse. She sat on one side of the couch, phone in hand, while I sat on the other, pretending I wasn't drowning in the silence. I tried to fix it. I suggested a weekend away, just the two of us like we used to do before life got in the way. "I don't have time for that," she said, barely glancing up from her phone. I offered to cook for her again, something different this time, maybe breakfast in bed. I'm not really hungry in the mornings, she said, brushing me off. I tried to initiate intimacy, to pull her close, to remind her of what we used to be. I'm just not in the mood, she mumbled, rolling over in bed. Excuse after excuse, night after night. And then I noticed something. It wasn't just me she had lost interest in. It was everything. She stopped laughing at the shows we used to watch together. She stopped telling me about her day, about her coworkers, about the silly little things that used to make her smile. She had checked out of our marriage in slow, deliberate steps, and I had been too blind to see it happening. Until one night, when the truth hit me harder than I was ready for. We were eating dinner, or rather I was. Emily had barely touched her plate, scrolling through her phone the entire time. I watched her, waiting for her to look up, to say something, to acknowledge me. She didn't. After a while, I cleared the table alone. She used to help me. It used to be something we did together. But now it was just another thing I did by myself. When I walked back into the living room, she was curled up on the couch, still glued to her phone, her face blank, completely detached from the world around her. Something inside me snapped. Enough. I walked over and sat beside her. Emily, we need to talk. She let out a sigh, finally putting her phone down, her expression bored. About what? About us. About this distance between us. She sighed again, rubbing her temple like I was exhausting her. Liam, I don't know what you want from me. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. I want my wife back. She scoffed, crossing her arms. I haven't gone anywhere. I let out a slow breath, trying to keep my frustration in check. Then why do I feel like I'm married to a ghost? We haven't been close in months. You barely touch me. You barely talk to me. You don't even act like you want to be in the same room as me. She rolled her eyes. I told you, I'm tired. Can't you just understand that? Tired? I repeated, shaking my head. You're tired all the time. That's all I ever hear. But all I see is you making excuses to avoid me. She scoffed, shaking her head. Oh, so now I know how I feel, huh? Well, if I feel like it, I will. And if I don't, then I won't. Simple as that. And then she said it. What I do with my body is none of your business. The words hit me like a slap. My mind stuttered for a moment, trying to process what I had just heard. What? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She leaned back against the couch, arms still crossed. Just because we're married doesn't mean I owe you anything. I felt something inside me crack. I wasn't asking for something I wasn't willing to give in return. I wasn't demanding. I was begging for connection. Emily, I don't think you understand, I said slowly. This isn't about obligation. This is about love, about being close to the person you chose to marry. She let out a dry laugh. You're making this way more dramatic than it is. Not everything has to be about you, Liam. Silence. A cold, suffocating silence stretched between us. That was it. That was the moment I knew I was the only one holding on. And I was done. I stared at her, really looked at her. This woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with. And all I saw was someone who had already let go of me a long time ago. For months, I had begged for scraps of affection. I had made excuses for her coldness. I had tried to convince myself that if I just worked harder, if I just waited longer, she'd come back to me. But now I saw the truth. She wasn't coming back, because she had already left. She had checked out of this marriage long before this conversation. She had just been waiting for me to catch up. And I finally did. Something inside me shifted, like a weight I had been carrying for years suddenly lifted. I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't even sad anymore. I was just done. I stood up. Emily frowned. What does that mean? I walked over to the chair, grabbed my jacket, and slid it on. It means I hear you loud and clear. She let out a dry, almost amused laugh. So what? You're leaving. I looked at her one last time, taking in the sight of the woman who used to be my everything. Yeah, I said quietly. I am. I didn't yell. I didn't slam the door. I didn't make a dramatic exit. I just walked out. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I didn't go far that night. I ended up at a small, dimly lit bar a few blocks from our apartment. The kind of place where no one asks questions and the bartender only nods when you order a drink. I wasn't much of a drinker, but I needed something to dull the ache in my chest. I sat there for hours, nursing a whiskey, replaying everything over and over in my head. The signs had been there for months, maybe even years. Emily's distant glances, her constant distractions, the way she pulled away from my touch as if it burned. I had fought so hard to save something that she had already thrown away. And I felt stupid. Stupid for not seeing it sooner. Stupid for letting her words get to me. Stupid for believing that love alone could fix what was broken. At some point, the bartender gave me a knowing look. "You look like a man who just lost something." I let out a breath. "Yeah, I think I did." "Want my advice?" he said, wiping down the counter. I nodded. "Don't try to hold onto a ghost." I let the words sink in. A ghost. That's exactly what Emily had become to me. A shadow of the woman I had loved. I paid for my drink and left, the cold night air biting at my skin as I walked aimlessly through the city. I thought about going home, but the idea of stepping back into that apartment, of seeing her there, pretending like our conversation hadn't just shattered the last pieces of my heart, made me feel sick. So I didn't go home. I checked into a hotel instead. It was a small, nondescript room, just a bed, a desk, and a window overlooking the city. Nothing special, nothing comforting. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. No messages, no missed calls. Emily hadn't reached out. She wasn't asking where I was. She wasn't worried. She wasn't fighting for me. And that told me everything I needed to know. I turned my phone off and lay back, staring at the ceiling. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just felt empty, like I'd been holding on to something so tightly for so long that now, without it, I didn't know what to do with my hands. But maybe that was the point. Maybe it was time to let go. Maybe it was time to figure out who I was without her. And for the first time in years, I realized I had no idea who that person was. The hotel room became my temporary escape. I stayed there for 2 nights, barely sleeping, barely eating. Just thinking about the past 7 years, about the man I had become, the man who had spent years chasing a woman who had already let go of him. I had always told myself that love required patience, that marriages went through rough patches, that things would get better. But love wasn't supposed to feel like this. Love wasn't supposed to feel like begging. On the 3rd morning, I finally turned my phone back on. Still nothing from Emily. I wasn't sure what I expected. A message? A missed call? A simple "where are you?" But there was nothing. And that silence said everything. I knew I had to go back eventually. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. I needed to face what was left of our marriage. I needed to stop hiding. So that afternoon, I walked back into our apartment. Emily was there, sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. She barely glanced at me as I stepped inside. "You're back." Not "where were you?" Not "are you okay?" Just a simple, emotionless statement. I stood there for a moment, taking it in. The way she didn't look at me. The way she didn't seem to care. Something inside me cracked. I set my keys down on the counter, my voice calm but firm. "Emily, we need to talk." She sighed, rubbing her temple like I was an inconvenience. "Not this again, Liam." I ignored the frustration in her tone. "I'm serious." She put her phone down and finally looked at me. "What?" I took a deep breath. "I can't do this anymore." Her brows furrowed. "Do what?" "This." I gestured between us, living like strangers, pretending like we're okay when we're not, acting like this marriage isn't already over. She let out a short, bitter laugh. "So what? You're just giving up?" "No," I said quietly. "I gave up a long time ago. I just didn't want to admit it." For the first time in months, I saw something flicker in her expression. A hesitation, a crack in the indifference she had built around herself. She swallowed. "So what does this mean?" I met her eyes. "It means I'm done." Silence. Long, suffocating silence. Then she shook her head, her jaw tightening. "You're being dramatic." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Am I?" She crossed her arms. "We've been together for 7 years, Liam. You don't just walk away from that." "You walked away first," I said, my voice steady. "You just never had the decency to tell me." She blinked, her mouth opening slightly, as if she wanted to argue. But no words came out, and for the first time, I saw it. The truth. She had stopped loving me a long time ago, and now she was only fighting because she never thought I'd actually leave. I stepped back, my decision final. "I'll stay with a friend for now. We'll figure out the rest later." I turned toward the bedroom, grabbing a duffel bag and stuffing it with whatever I could fit. Emily stood in the hallway, watching me, her arms still crossed over her chest. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't say anything, and that hurt more than anything else. By the time I zipped up the bag and slung it over my shoulder, I felt lighter. Not because this was easy, but because for the first time in years, I wasn't clinging to something that was already gone. I walked toward the door, pausing only for a second. "Goodbye, Emily." I didn't wait for a response. I stepped out and closed the door behind me. And just like that, it was over. The first night in my friend Alex's spare room felt surreal. I lay on the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for regret to hit me. But it never came. There was no panic, no second-guessing, just quiet, a silence that didn't feel empty, but peaceful. For years, I had convinced myself that if I just tried harder, if I just held on, Emily and I could fix things. But now, I realized I had been the only one holding on. The next morning, I texted her. "We need to talk about the next steps." Her response came an hour later. "So that's it? You just leave, and now you're ready to throw everything away?" Asterisk, asterisk. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. Instead, I called a lawyer. The process took months, filled with paperwork, uncomfortable conversations, and moments where Emily swung between cold indifference and desperate attempts to reel me back in. At first, she ignored the papers, refusing to sign them. Then came the late-night calls, the "I miss you" messages, the attempts to make me jealous by posting pictures with other guys. I didn't react, not because I didn't care, but because I had cared too much for too long. The truth was, I had already mourned our marriage while I was still in it. By the time the divorce was finalized, I didn't feel sadness. I felt relief, and for the first time in years, I was free. Life after Emily wasn't some dramatic overnight transformation. I didn't wake up one day suddenly healed, suddenly happy. But little by little, I started rebuilding. I focused on work, spent more time with friends, picked up old hobbies I had abandoned in my effort to keep a dying marriage alive. And then, one evening, I met her. Her name was Sophie. It wasn't some grand, cinematic moment, just two people who happened to be in the same bookstore, reaching for the same novel. We started talking, and talking turned into coffee. Coffee turned into late-night conversations. Conversations turned into something I hadn't felt in years, connection. Sophie wasn't like Emily. Where Emily had been distant, Sophie was present. Where Emily made me feel like I was asking for too much, Sophie made me feel wanted. With her, love wasn't something I had to fight for. It was something that just was. And then, one evening, Emily showed up. It had been almost a year since I left. A late knock on my door. I opened it to find her standing there, eyes red and puffy, like she had been crying for hours. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, her gaze flickered past me, to Sophie, sitting on my couch, a book in her lap. Her expression twisted. Who the hell is she? I sighed, already exhausted by the situation. This is Sophie, my girlfriend. Emily let out a short, bitter laugh. Wow, so that's it? You just replaced me. I didn't respond, because there was nothing to argue about. She ran a hand through her hair, her voice softer now. Liam, I made mistakes. I know that. But I've been thinking a lot, and her voice cracked. I want to try again. I stared at her, waiting for something, a pull, a hesitation, a part of me that still wanted to go back. But there was nothing, because I wasn't that man anymore. I had spent years begging Emily to care. And now that I had finally moved on, asterisk, now asterisk, she wanted me back, it didn't work that way. I took a slow breath, my voice steady. It's too late, Emily. Her eyes widened slightly, like she hadn't expected me to actually say it. Liam, please. I beg you to fight for us when it mattered, I said. And you didn't. Her lip trembled. I didn't think you'd ever leave. And that was the problem. She never thought she had to choose me. She had assumed I would always be there, no matter how little effort she put in. But she was wrong. I glanced at Sophie, who had been quietly watching, not insecure, not jealous, just understanding. Because she knew this wasn't about her. This was about me finally choosing myself. I turned back to Emily. Don't come here again. For a second, I thought she might argue, might fight. But then, something in her expression crumbled. Because she saw it too. that I was really, truly done. So she swallowed, took a step back, and whispered, "Goodbye, Liam." Then she turned and walked away. I shut the door, locked it, and as I turned back to Sophie, she gave me a small smile. "You okay?" I let out a slow breath, and for the first time in years, I smiled back. "Yeah," I said, and I meant it.